Hi, everybody. Welcome to our discussion on Ukraine with General Ben Hodges and Spirit of America's Colleen Denny. I am Jim Hake, the founder and CEO at Spirit of America, and I'm very happy to see so many of our supporters on the call today, including members of our board of directors and board of advisors and many other supporters. Thank you for your support. It allows us to do everything we're doing in Ukraine and elsewhere. And I think today will be a great update on the situation there from General Hodges and Colleen. For those of you who don't know us, Spirit of America is a privately funded nonprofit. This is our 20th year, our 20th anniversary. And we've been active in Ukraine, helping Ukraine defend its freedom for 10 years. Since the original invasion by Russia in 2014. And since the full-scale invasion in 2022, our focus has been on providing non-lethal assistance to help Ukrainian soldiers. And our goal is to save lives and stop the suffering at its source by helping Ukraine stop and defeat Russia. To that end, we've raised $60 million to provide a wide range of non-lethal assistance to Ukraine's military. Everything has been based on needs identified by and in coordination with the U.S. military. You can think about it as our filling gaps between what's needed and what government can do. And our millions of dollars of support has had billions of dollars of documented impact, not including the lives that have been saved through that support as well. So if you're looking for a way to help stop Russia and help Ukraine defend itself, you are in the right place today. More broadly, our team is also active in Taiwan and the Middle East. We work very closely with really uniting citizens with America's troops and diplomats to help America preserve the promise of a free and better life. According to the Wall Street Journal, we are a coalition of the can-do. And you'll hear a little bit more about what that can-do is doing from Colleen today. We're the only organization that has an agreement with the Department of Defense that allows the U.S. military to collaborate with us. And that's the background on us. So housekeeping, you can submit questions via the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. We already have quite a few questions that have come in over the last couple of days as you all have registered. Thank you for those. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce a friend, Spirit of America Advisory Board member, and a true member of the coalition of the can-do, General Ben Hodges. I first met General Hodges when he was a commander of U.S. Army Europe after the original Russian invasion, and we've known each other for almost 10 years now. He joined our advisory board in 2017, and he's been especially helpful with our operations in Ukraine. So General Hodges, thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, Jim, thank you for the privilege, as well as thanks for what Spirit of America does, and also for pairing me with a legendary Colleen Denny today, who has some Ukraine dirt under her fingernails, recent dirt. So I'm happy to have this chance.
Terrific. And before we get into some of the detailed questions, if you could just give us your take on why Putin started this war in the first place, because that's going to inform how it might end.
Yeah, well, it started because of failed deterrence on our part. We, the West, did nothing after they invaded Georgia in 2008. We did nothing after they invaded Ukraine in 2014, and we really did nothing after they jumped over the red line in Syria about Assad using chemical weapons against his own people. So it was our failure to actually stop Russia when we could have. And then, of course, in 2022, early 22, they're looking around and they've heard both from the American leadership and the French president that, NATO is brain dead, or we should get out of NATO. We had our own domestic problems here in the States, or there in the States. The Germans were still building Nord Stream 2. So you could imagine that the Russians are thinking, well, let's go ahead and finish the job, because the West is not going to do anything again. So now we're at 2 years deep into the large-scale invasion by Russia. massive destruction and hundreds of thousands of people killed or maimed. It just should have never gotten here because the collective we, failed to realize or acknowledge the danger and deal with Russia when we could have.
And what's your assessment of the current battlefield situation?
Well, it's a very difficult situation, obviously, for Ukrainian soldiers, primarily because they were running out of ammunition. I mean, literally running out of ammunition. The Russians, after 10 years, with all the advantages, they still only control 20% of Ukraine. A third of their navy is now underwater. Their air force has failed in the most critical tasks. They've lost 500,000 of their own soldiers, and they don't have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. Unfortunately, because Ukraine has not got enough ammunition, especially long-range precision weapons, and this is bad policy decisions on our part and on the part of Germany. The Ukrainians have had to fall back in recent months under this onslaught of Russian artillery that the Ukrainians have not been able to counter. And also because the Russians, their standard practice is to try to drown their opponent in Russian corpses. So, I mean, they push relatively untrained troops of their own because they don't care about their own casualties in hopes of overwhelming the Ukrainian defender. So the Ukrainians need support. And while I'm proud of what the U.S. has done, the fact it took 8 months to get this last aid package through is a reflection of, number one, our own internal domestic issues, but also, frankly, the president has the responsibility to explain why this matters. And, the fact that we have not said we want Ukraine to actually win, to defeat Russia, push them back to 1991 borders, that if you don't have a clear objective, it's difficult to have good policy. And so we have not had consistently good policy about delivering to Ukraine what they need. And I think it stems in part from not having a clearly defined objective.
And with the new military assistance package, when and how is that going to make a difference?
Well, of course, the Department of Defense was doing what they should have been doing, which was to lean forward and anticipate that approval would eventually happen. So I think some of the things that were approved were already prepositioned either in Poland or in Germany or somewhere in the States for rapid delivery. I don't know what percentage of that or how much of that is already underway, how much of it's still coming. But I think some effect is already there. And Colleen probably can talk specifically to things like the ATACMS that have already been employed, it appears. That's good news. Some of the things will take longer. The bottom line is, I think this package will buy time for Ukraine probably through the rest of this year. It will buy time for them to grow the size of their army, which they desperately need to do, and also for other allies and partners to help deliver ammunition. And I think we probably will see a lot of ammunition showing up here later in the year. So that's the main effect of this package, is that it buys time for Ukraine for this year. And it also sent a message to the Kremlin that the United States, we're still committed. We're not turning our back on Ukraine, which is, of course, what the Kremlin was hoping for.
And we have about 5 different versions of this question that have come in. I'll use this one. Given where we are, what do success and win look like realistically for Ukraine?
Well, the only true objective should be the defeat of Russia and push them back to the 1991 borders. And that is realistic, but it's up to us. Ukraine is doing what they can, and they've done that without the United States or Germany or the rest of Europe declaring that we want Ukraine to win. I mean, 61 billion is a lot, but in the great scheme of things, I would say we haven't even tried yet. We haven't really tried yet to help Ukraine win. We haven't stated that that's our policy objective. And so if we said that, then all of the holes in the sanctions, we'd be filling those holes immediately. I was very happy to see Secretary Yellen just a couple of weeks ago announce 300 or 30 different Chinese companies are now sanctioned that were providing things to Russia. why is that just now happening? That's what I mean. We haven't tried. We haven't used all of our economic leverage. But the only way we prevent Russia from continuing forward is by defeating them. The idea that somehow there's a negotiated settlement with Russia, people that believe that have either never looked at a map or they don't know who Russia is, don't understand that the Russians have zero evidence that they would ever live up to any agreement that we can't enforce. And so I think the best way to make sure that NATO does not get into a conflict with Russia is that Russia is defeated inside Ukraine. Otherwise, we will get drawn into a conflict.
Well, this is, you just touched on the last question, which I'll ask you before going over to Colleen, but to expand upon a little bit more, what are the implications both in Europe and more broadly if Russia wins?
So let me answer it first by saying, why is it important for us, for the United States, for people that live in Missouri and California and New York and Michigan and Georgia? Number one, our economy, our prosperity is tied directly to European prosperity. It's the biggest trade relationship on the planet between the United States and Europe. So if there's a massive war going on in Europe that interrupts food supplies, energy supplies, or puts millions of Ukrainian refugees on the road into Europe, that affects our prosperity. That's number one. Number two, we do not want to have U.S. troops involved in a conflict in Europe as part of NATO. So if Ukraine is able to defeat Russia with our help, that will never happen. So that's the best way to avoid us being into that conflict. And then number three, of course, the Chinese are watching to see, are we serious when we talk about the so-called international rules-based order, freedom of navigation, respect for sovereignty, respect for human rights, respect for international agreements, all those things that we say are so important. If we don't commit to defending those things against Russia, where it's much easier to do it in Europe than it would be out in the Pacific, then I don't think the Chinese will be very impressed when we talk about sovereignty or respect for freedom of navigation out in the Indo-Pacific. So if Ukraine fails, it will only be because we allowed them to fail. And then Russia has already said they're going to continue on, that Ukraine or Crimea is not the only thing that they want. So that means that the Romanians have already said that they will protect Moldova. They will not allow Moldova to be overrun by Russia. And I don't think that Poland is going to sit back behind the Vistula River and watch Russia keep coming forward across Ukraine. So now you've got two NATO countries that potentially get involved. Millions more Ukrainian refugees will start heading into Poland and into Germany, which obviously will have a significant negative effect. And then I think that the two other things that people should be aware of, Russia will absorb tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and all their equipment. Ukrainians won't be volunteering to join the Russian army, but the Russian army will absorb them and force them into the fight. So actually, the Russian army becomes stronger if they succeed against Ukraine and hoover up all of this equipment and hoover up these soldiers. And then, of course, the air and missile attacks that are happening against Ukrainian cities and killing innocent people in Ukraine, you can be sure that if Russia has made the terrible decision to attack a NATO country, then they've already made the terrible decision to launch missiles and rockets against the infrastructure and civilians in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania.
Well, to that great rundown, I'll add a couple of other things that we can worry about if Russia prevails in Ukraine. As you know, General, the Spirit of America team is active in the Middle East and in Africa. And in both of those regions, Russia's fingerprints are on most of the worst things that are happening. And that happened long, but that's been going on for a very long time. And so we can only expect Russia to be further emboldened, of course, if it prevails, and all those situations to get worse as well. So the global implications that you've hit on really well are just really untenable for the United States.
And none of this is inevitable. I mean, that's the thing. All of this can be stopped. It could have been stopped last year. It's not too late for us to act, but we have to act. Russia Putin, just celebrated his, I think, 5th inauguration yesterday. So he's not going anywhere. I'm not clever enough to know what's going on inside Russia, but we're not going to see demonstrations in the street there against him the way young people in Georgia and Tbilisi, for example, are in the streets. That's not going to happen in Russia. So we have to help Ukraine defeat them the old-fashioned way.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Colleen Denny. Colleen is Spirit of America's Regional Director for Europe. She has spent a very substantial part of the last 2 years in Ukraine. She was on the ground in the region a couple of days after the Russian invasion in February of 2022, and she's just back. So, Colleen, can you tell us what you saw, what you did, and what we're doing in a quick nutshell?
Sure. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, General Hodges, for joining today. So I just returned a few days ago from Ukraine, and this was my 17th trip to the country since the full-scale Russian invasion. So the mood and overall morale of all the partners we met, both civilian and military, was significantly higher than my previous trips over the last 4 months, 5 months of this year. And that was simply because Congress had just passed the $61 billion assistance bill for Ukraine. So our partners were breathing a small sigh of relief, but it was still quite obvious the toll that they've paid over the last several months as they had to ration munitions, as they had to go day by day, and as they had to wonder whether American and Western partners, were going to stand by their word to help them. So as General Hodges described earlier, the fighting is just incredibly challenging, but the Ukrainians are doing everything they can to defend their democracy, defend their land, and defend their country. And it's not just the armed forces or political leadership who are committed to defending their country. It's also civil society. Everyday Ukrainians who are part of civil society, where they're incredibly active, they're mobilized, and they're motivated because they understand what's at stake. And what's at stake is the abduction and kidnapping of Ukrainian children and their forced removal to Russia. It's forced conscription of Ukrainian men who will be conscripted into the Russian army and fight against their own people in their own country. It's sexual violence against men, women, and children. And it's the brutal elimination of Ukrainian identity. So all Ukrainians understand this, whether they're in uniform or not. And they understand that they have no other option but to keep defending their country and serving their nation. Because as General Hodges said, there will never be peace as long as Russia occupies any Ukrainian territory. It's a brutal, oppressive, violent occupation. And the fight on the battlefield is quite difficult. I met with a Ukrainian combat medic, a woman named Tata, who has been a volunteer combat medic since 2021. And she described the fighting she's recently seen and just the unimaginable conditions the soldiers are living and fighting in. She was recently serving on the front line in southern Ukraine near Kherson, and described it as people just fighting with their own flesh, and how difficult it is to medevac wounded Ukrainian soldiers because Russians don't respect or follow the Geneva Convention laws, which state that purposefully attacking or killing medics is a war crime. In fact, she shared that Russian forces are intentionally prioritizing the targeting of medics because they assess that if they kill a medic, then they kill more soldiers indirectly. But still, Ukraine fights on. And after all of my meetings with civil society as well as armed forces partners, I'm confident that the armed forces of Ukraine can stop these Russian advances if they are properly equipped and if they continue to be properly equipped by the US and Western partners. So what are we doing now with Spirit of America, and how can we continue to help Ukraine? We're continuing our work to provide secure communications gear to elite units identified to us by the American military personnel at the Security Assistance Group for Ukraine. That's the headquarters in Germany that is coordinating all assistance, international and American, to Ukraine. So the secure gear that we're providing, which is cell phones, tablets, laptops, and other accessories, allow these Ukrainian units to plan, synchronize, and organize their operations, which causes a tangible increase in their ability to deploy their troops safely and effectively. therefore saving lives, increasing their ability to defend themselves and to fight smarter. So Michael, if we could pull up the first slide, please. So because of our trusted partnership with the US military, we were invited and able to attend a training session in Kyiv, which taught these special forces soldiers how to use the new gear. And so pictured here, we're handing out the Spirit of America provided communications gear at the week-long training event. The next slide was showing a picture just a few kilometers back from the front line. There was a UAV team that had attended the training we hosted in Kyiv, and they were showing a drone that they had and several tablets and a Starlink that we provided to these teams. We're also continuing to support elite Ukrainian Special Forces units that our US Special Forces partners identify to us as being the most capable units, but they still lack basic non-lethal assistance. So just last week, we delivered 150 pairs of night vision goggles to a special missions unit. And of course, they immediately put those to use. And here, okay, here's a photo here of the NVGs on the left and the soldiers wearing them that same evening. Other urgently needed assistance that is we're prioritizing providing is thermal mitigating gear. So ponchos and hide sites that protect Ukrainian soldiers from the Russian drones flying overhead that have thermal cameras. We're providing armored pickup trucks, cargo vans, reconnaissance drones, counter UAV equipment such as drone jammers, and medical gear. So the end users for our aid are Ukrainian Special Operations Forces units that have been trained or are currently being trained by US Special Forces, because these are the units that can move the needle most on the battlefield. So if we can go, yep. So a quick update also on a program that we established last year. This is the Combat Shower Program. So we were able to purchase and provide 12 mobile combat showers, and happy to say that all 12 are still fully functional today and are serving frontline territorial defense force units. So each combat shower can be towed from location to location, and they provide showers and laundry to 50 to 100 soldiers per day. And we've received feedback that they were essential, not just for morale, but also for the basic hygiene needs that the soldiers have fighting in trenches, being on the front line, especially through this past winter and the muddy early spring. So soldiers have shared with us how they felt human again after showering and washing their uniforms for the first time in weeks. And as we put on a plaque in each combat shower, human dignity starts with a clean pair of socks. So I'll pass it back to you, Jim, and happy to answer any questions about being on the ground recently.
Thanks very much, Colleen. And a number of other questions have come in. One of them, General Hodges, is regarding your expected impact of the F-16s. What difference will that make?
Well, of course, it's a fantastic platform. It's why we have it, but it's not magic. It's how is it going to be employed? The Ukrainian pilots will be just as good as anybody else could ever be, but it's going to take a little time for them to get to where they're flying confidently, conducting operations. And I suspect the Ukrainian Air Force will find ways to build confidence and learn how to employ this capability. It'll be helpful against Russian aircraft delivering missiles against Ukrainian cities. It'll be useful helping to make Crimea untenable for the Russian Army, Navy, and Air Force, and then, of course, in some other ground support roles. But the Russians have always had very, very thick air defense capabilities at every level, so it'll be a very challenging environment.
And related to one of your points earlier, what has been the effect of, or the degree, I'll say, in the effect of the absorption of Ukrainian men in the currently occupied areas into Russia's armed forces? So you mentioned that there would be more of that if Russia moved further west. How has that gone so far?
Well, of course, there have been Ukrainian men that were in the occupied territories that were pressed into service, that are now forced into Russian military. Not as many at this point, but that has happened. And of course, what the Ukrainians are really worried about, with good reason, is what happens to Ukrainian civilians that are left behind in these occupied territories. I mean, we know what happens when the Russians show up in a village or in a town. It is bad news for the people that are there. So I don't think we've seen huge numbers of Ukrainians yet that were absorbed. What I'm talking about on that is if we have significant, massive failure and big chunks of the Ukrainian military get captured, for example, or overrun, those are the ones that I would see getting impressed.
And what regarding Ukraine's manpower, what is the status of Ukrainian manpower? And another question that's related is, can the Ukrainians solve their manpower shortage?
It's an excellent question. And again, I think Colleen will have some insight from this. I was astounded, frankly, when I heard that the average age of the Ukrainian soldier was over 40, and that the minimum age for conscription was 27, and they just completed a big political fight to get it down to 25. And when I speak to my Ukrainian friends to ask, like, how can this be? And they talk about the concern of losing an entire generation of young men. And of course you say, yeah, but it'll be a lot worse if you lose your country. So this is something that they're going to have to address for practical reasons. They don't have enough troops to be able to have reasonable rotations of units. And I think many of the brigades, these guys are getting worn out. So it is fixable, but it will require leadership from the civilian side. And they have to make sure that Ukrainian men and women, I think women is an untapped resource here, are an untapped resource. The government has to make it clear that they won't send somebody into the fight until they're properly trained, properly equipped, and will be put into a unit that's ready to go into the fight. And if something should happen, that their family will be taken care of. Exactly how the U.S. military does it and most other Western militaries do it.
And the question I'll ask each of you to take a crack at, what difference can private assistance make?
Huge difference. With our model and working alongside deployed U.S. troops who are training and communicating daily with Ukrainian forces, we're getting real-time needs and very niche specific needs for elite units that big government is not built to ever supply and is not good at doing small detailed needs like this. However, these small needs can be the difference between a soldier staying alive and being wounded or killed. It can be the difference between maintaining a village, maintaining territory. It can be the difference between shaping operations and staying disguised and deceiving Russian plans. So we have received, pretty incredible feedback from our U.S. military partners about the programs that we're implementing and the return on investment that it's having in the field. And if you ask any Ukrainian soldier, every single one I talk to, they always share, one, how thankful they are for American support and the American people, but two, they also state how, and this is 100% across the line, they state how much it means to them that an American civilian like myself is there talking with them, seeing what their needs are, and that we're meeting those needs because of ordinary Americans who understand what's at stake and want to support these soldiers. So it's an incalculable assessment, but the impact it has on the mental health and well-being of the armed forces and these individual soldiers is the aid coming from an American citizen, in many ways feels more significant than aid coming from Uncle Sam.
That's great. General Hodges, anything you want to add there?
Well, only, Jim, of course, when I first encountered the Spirit of America, is you were doing just that. You and your team were helping fill the gap on things that the government couldn't or wouldn't provide that helped us accomplish our mission. That's the value of it. And I agree completely with Colleen. The world has high expectations of the United States. They believe in the U.S., that U.S. will always, despite whatever our own problems are, will always figure out a way to help and do the right thing. And so this is a tangible manifestation of what people think of America, whatever they might think about the government at the time.
And a related question, how can the modest amount I am able to donate have any effect on the needs of the Ukrainian war effort? And I'll take that one as we close it out. And Karen, thank you for asking that. The only thing that has ever really made a difference in America is individual Americans doing their part. We have a country because a bunch of citizens came together about 249, I guess, years ago to create a country. I started Spirit of America and as one person doing a little bit in a spare bedroom in my house about 20 years ago. And here we are now, and that's led to, among many other things, $60 million getting over to Ukraine that's saving lives. So the thing that's more important, it's routine that small efforts are almost always underestimated in terms of their impact, both the direct impact and, as Colleen touched on, the intangible psychological impact. And the ripple effect of our individual actions are incalculable. So I hope that's a good answer to your question. For everyone else, we'll do our best to get to the questions that we did not answer today, and there are a lot of them. I wish we had more time, but thank you for joining us. General Hodges, thank you for being with us again. It is an incredible privilege and a whole lot of fun to have you as a part of our team. Colleen, again, thank you as well. And for everyone on the call, if you're looking for a way to help Ukraine protect itself and defeat Russia, and more broadly defend freedom and democracy in the world, Spirit of America is a great place. We'd love to hear from you and have you join our efforts as well. Thank you all.